How could the US election cast influence over the continent of Africa? Well, the US in Africa has dwindled in recent years. Many African countries have been turning to China and more recently to Russia. But the US is trying to regain influence on the continent with an altogether different approach. Isaac Kadelsky reports on how America is prioritizing key investments that target Africa's youth.
These young Ghanaians are taking computer lessons at this digital lab in Choko, a deprived community in the capital Accra. Some of them are using and learning about computers for the first time, building their digital literacy skills from scratch. The lab is an initiative of an American social entrepreneur, Patricia Wilkins.
We launched the program just a few months ago, and we've already had one cohort of students, and we've graduated 25 students with their first certificates in hardware and networking. Currently, we're running our second cohort, and we have almost 100 students, and we have 3 classes.
American digital communications technology firm Cisco is sponsoring this lab. Expanding digital access and literacy in Africa has been a key U.S. initiative since 2022. It has led to increased commercial engagement between African and American companies in the digital sector. With a growing younger population in Africa, the U.S. wants to invest in the continent's youth while striking an equal partnership with shared interests. America's influence in Africa was substantial in the past, from funding major infrastructure projects, providing security support, and rolling out major trade deals. But a lot has changed. Analysts say that's due to the emergence of China and Russia.
Africa has not been a major priority of the United States in the past 2 decades, in that what we call the Asian pivot, where they wanted to counter the influence of China in Asia, made Africa a back burner. They put Africa in the back burner. But recently, because of issues including the population growth that comes with markets, resources, and the sheer influence that China is exerting in Africa, U.S. wants to counter that.
But the U.S. has lost a lot of ground to China. The Asian giant is now a major creditor and trading partner to most African countries, funding major infrastructure projects like this fishing harbor in Accra. In the past 2 decades, the International Monetary Fund says China has become Sub-Saharan Africa's largest bilateral trading partner. Around 20% of the region's exports now go to China, and about 16% of Africa's imports come from China. Russia is also pushing harder, especially in the Sahel region. Some analysts believe African countries need to combine their interests to get the best deals. And projects like this one in Accra may just be what the U.S. needs to rekindle its influence once more. Isaac Kadelsky, TRT World, Accra, Ghana.
Let's bring in Crystal Odison in Cape Town. So, Crystal, talk us through then the strategic relationship between the two countries. And is it one that could change perhaps after this election, given which candidate wins?
There's anxiety here in South Africa, at the southern tip of Africa, because South Africa is the US's largest trading partner in Africa. We're talking two-way trade worth $20 billion. South Africa has a bit of anxiety because they are the major beneficiary of the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, which is a free trade pact that the US has with different African countries. However, there's been some question mark whether South Africa will remain in that AGOA pact. And so there's anxiety here in South Africa because already we heard from the newly appointed ministers that, of course, a Trump presidency, a Republican presidency might mean that that AGOA pact might not be renewed. And this is due to already we've heard from Republican senators raising questions on South Africa's relations with For instance, China and Russia, that is part of the BRICS formation, and also South Africa's case at the International Criminal Court of Justice. But to talk to me and to analyze South Africa-US trade relations, I'm joined by Professor Randall Carolison, Dean of the Business School at the University of Johannesburg. Randall, talk to us about the anxiety and real trepidation that South Africa has with perhaps a Trump presidency and what it would mean for trade relations between the two countries.
That's the right approach to follow, to look at the debt situation, not just of South Africa, but the entire Africa. So post-COVID, Africa's debt has surged. It's to 65%, with some relief it's come down to 68%, some relief it's come down to 65%, which is still higher than the pre-COVID period. So the anxiety is around the instability of the inability to analyze Trump's fiscal and monetary policies. Even analysts are saying they don't know which way the interest rates are going. If the interest rates are going to go higher, then Africa is going to pay much more than $160 billion in debt servicing costs that we have at the moment. So that's already a big concern. The looseness of its fiscal policy and the way he treats his Reserve Bank with disdain also doesn't speak well to, so we call it the African anxiety.
But Randall, talk to us about, that's the real reality of a Trump presidency, but what would a Harris presidency mean for Africa? Because the relationship historically between Africa and the Democrats have been much more cordial. We even saw Kamala Harris coming to Africa last year. She visited Ghana, she visited Tanzania, and she also visited Zambia.
So, yes, let's put the Trump then aside. Let's look at the Democrats and Kamala. I suspect that she will pretty much maintain the current trajectory, but with a caveat in the sense that the AGOA renewal is coming up in 2025. I don't think it's going to be business as usual. I think America, whether it's Trump or Harris, are going to be much more strategic in the application and the rollout and the qualification of countries to benefit from the AGOA. For instance, I know that, and this is what my research has shown, that under Kamala Harris presidency, she would be using the AGOA provisions to foster better governance, to root out corruption, to forward the green agenda, and I think very importantly also to bring in the AI agenda into Africa. So she's going to be using it as a lever as opposed to a carte blanche, just giving out trade and every now and then disqualify errant nations.
Okay.
So it's going to be much more strategic arrangement than previously.
Thank you for those insights. So there we have it from Professor Randall Carolison from the University of Johannesburg, that it's not going to be business as usual for Africa, whether it's a Trump presidency or whether it's a Harris presidency. However, policymakers here in South Africa are, of course, behind closed doors, hoping that it will be a Democrat presidency where they know what kind of relationship they will have with the US.
Okay, thank you so much. Crystal Otterson in Cape Town. Well, Timothy Obeza is in the Nigerian capital, Abuja, and joins us now. So how are Nigerians then feeling about the US elections?
Thank you. From here in Nigeria, it's been a mixed bag in terms of who the people expect to emerge as the next president of the United States of America. This is essentially because neither Donald Trump nor Kamala Harris made it clear what their plans for Africa, would be when, either of them got to the White House. But then in terms of popularity contest, Donald Trump, despite, previously making derogatory statements or remarks about the continent and recently saying that his administration would focus on America first, policies. He represents to many Africans, to many Nigerians here, something more important, and that's the defense of the very conservative religious and social norms. Nigeria, Africa is a highly conservative community, and many people here expect Donald Trump to continue to speak up against religious persecutions like it's done in the past, in Nigeria. They also praise, his position around around issues of abortion and the LGBTQ rights. But then Kamala Harris, on the other hand, represents something new. For many African women and girls, it's the fresh hope that they dare dream to become, anything, and it might be possible. But then Kamala Harris also represents, the reflection of a U.S. government that could be more friendly in terms of relations with Africa. Kamala Harris already visited 3 African nations last year, as part of her responsibilities, of course, during the Joe Biden administration. But overall,
Timothy, I wanted to just ask you as well. You mentioned there that Kamala represents something new. So does the US perhaps need to repair its relationship with African countries, not just Nigeria, especially when you have many of the nations turning more towards China and Russia more recently?
I totally agree with that. The U.S. indeed needs to, repair its relationship with the African continent. What we've seen in the past years, in recent years, I was going to mention the challenge, the 3 major challenges that, the next U.S. president would face in Africa, and that would be the decline of democracy. With the recent wave of coups that have taken place, America has become very unpopular in certain areas of Africa, and so much so that U.S. troops were booted out of countries like Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso. Also, we're seeing increasing challenge with insecurity, and with less members of the U.S. forces on the ground, it'd be more difficult for the U.S. to be able to maintain its position as the biggest major security partner for Africa. So the U.S. indeed needs to do a lot of work. Recently, we've seen that rivals like China and Russia have been expanding their influence in Africa. Right now, China accounts for, the most trade, China-Africa trade accounts for the most, in terms of volume and in terms of value, around $166 billion for this year alone. So the U.S. needs to, indeed do better. It must maintain its position as a major foreign partner to Africa, to Nigeria.
Well, let's see what they do and, of course, who wins. Timothy Obeza in Abuja, thank you. Africa is called the cradle of humankind and it's home to 1.5 billion people, according to the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. It also has the youngest population. The UN says that by 2050, 1 in 4 people on the planet will be African. The continent is also mineral rich. So what policies do Democrat Kamala Harris and Republican Donald Trump have for the continent? Well, Grace Akuria-Kanja breaks it down.
When Africa succeeds, the United States succeeds. Quite frankly, the whole world succeeds as well.
Despite promises to be all in on Africa's future, President Joe Biden has left his visit to the continent to the tail end of his presidency.
And no country more important than Angola.
He says he'll visit Angola in December after postponing the trip because of Hurricane Milton in Florida.
Waiting for the last minute shows the importance of Africa in Biden's agenda.
But his Vice President Kamala Harris visited Ghana, Tanzania and Zambia in March and April last year, unveiling the non-profit partnership for digital access that aims to provide internet access to 80% of Africa by 2030.
The United States is committed to strengthen our partnerships across the continent of Africa. Partnerships with governments, the private sector, civil society, and all of you. Partnerships based on openness, inclusiveness, candor, shared interests, and mutual benefits.
Harris will likely carry on with Biden's strategy toward sub-Saharan Africa, which seeks to elevate Africa's voice in global institutions like the United Nations Security Council, where Africa is seeking 2 permanent seats with veto power.
Africans see themselves as marginalized when it comes to the current global order. Africans have no voice, as I said. Also, some of them think or believe that the foray and coming of global powers into Africa is kind of exploitation of their resources and their a mistreatment.
During his tenure at the Oval Office, Trump's administration launched a strategy called Prosper Africa in 2021 to support American investment across Africa and counter Chinese influence, but his rhetoric about undocumented immigration have landed him in trouble and often dismissed as untrue.
Last week, a lot of people came in from the Congo, a big prison in the Congo in Africa. Welcome to the United States.
Whoever wins will have to decide whether to renew the Clinton-era Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA, which allows duty-free access of goods from some African countries. It expires in 2025. Many hope that there will be a definitive push by the next American president to end the current wars that have hit Africans and the rest of the world hard. Grace Kuriakanja, TRT World.
The United States has historically shared a combination of economic, political, security and social interests with the African continent. Future relations are likely to stay on that path. Well, let's take a closer look. The Biden administration says it facilitated close of 547 deals, which are worth about $14.2 billion in a two-way trade and investment with African countries. Now, that includes trade under the Clinton-era African Growth and Opportunity Act, which allows duty-free access of goods to the U.S. market with some African nations. To counter Chinese infrastructure projects, the U.S. has put in $250 million to refurbish the 1,300-kilometer Lobito Corridor rail project that stretches from the Lobito port on Angola's Atlantic coast to Zambia through the Democratic Republic of Congo. When it comes to security, the U.S. military has a presence in at least 26 African countries. Now, the U.S. is thought to have at least 26 military bases on the continent, and Djibouti's Camp Limanoir is the biggest and only permanent U.S. base in Africa. It's situated along the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, a key maritime channel connecting Asia, Africa and Europe. But this year, the U.S. troops closed down their bases in Niger and Chad, and they were asked to leave by authorities there. Now, even though President Joe Biden hosted the U.S.-Africa summit in 2022. Well, Biden hasn't visited the continent yet as president, just like his predecessor. Critics say it shows that he hasn't prioritized African countries in his foreign policy, citing a planned visit to Angola in December as proof. Well, for more now on US-Africa relations, Anne Masharia is in Nairobi. So, Anne, talk us through it then. What's the feeling like amongst Kenyans about the US election?
Well, Kenyans have a mix of pragmatism and interest, especially in this election, and they are aware the impact of this, specifically this election, on Africa, especially on immigration, trade, and development. And for them, for those who are interviewed, many of them are very particular. They are hoping for a strong U.S. leader who will be able to, who is respectful, strong, and able to foster more relationship between the U.S. and African countries, and issues such as, and foster issues such as trade, development, and foreign policy. And for them, this is not just any other election. This is an election to not only that not only shows the democracy, powerful nations, that for some rather, it shows that for some that I've interviewed, many of them are looking at it as just another election where countries such as the U.S. tend to show African countries the importance of power transition, especially in African countries, given the reputation that is there is in African countries. But also for them, most importantly, is foreign policy, trade, development. They want someone who not only can foster this relationship, but also understand that we need each other for coexistence. So these are some of the key issues that Kenyans are raising. They're very, very interested. A majority of them are leaning towards Kamala Harris. The reason as to why they're doing it is because of her charisma, her diplomacy in terms of, and also her background in terms of fighting for human rights, climate change, and also development projects and initiatives that have been seen and received in African countries such as Kenya. So their keen interest is also not only who is going to win in this particular election, but also how, after this election, what happens to the U.S. policies towards Africa, depending on who might win in this particular election.
And so, Anne, then, I mean, you know, the Biden administration itself, it closed 547 deals with many African nations. But how much of that has actually gone to Kenya? I mean, you were talking about the need for, you know, better policy and trade. But what does, you know, either a Harris presidency or a Trump presidency change for your country and for its people?
Okay, so what while there is no specific number as to what the number of treaties that Kenya has received, it is important to say that a while ago we had human rights organizations that are fighting for abortion. They're fighting for the rights of abortion. Say that the reason as to why they are advocating for Kamala Harris is not only to continue with the Biden administration rather, but also to fight for the ongoing issues. We know Trump has always been the America first, and for him it's America first, and that is his approach. But for Kamala, it's not only the continuation of the Biden administration, but it's critical issues such as climate change. We all know Africa bears the brunt of climate change. And it's not Africa everywhere. It's not Africa only. It's other countries. So the reason as to why they are rallying behind Kamala is not only for development initiatives, but for basic things such as human rights, climate change, trade, immigration, foreign policy, and also being able to make sure that as much as African countries do not have enough employment opportunities, Kenyans can be able to get these opportunities outside countries such as US, UK, Turkey, just to mention a few. So that is why there's more keen interest, especially in this election. For them, Trump would mean being selfish, putting America first, and a continuation of what they had experienced during his first time. But for Kamala Harris, they are very open to do for development projects and such.
Okay, Anne Masharia in Nairobi, thank you.